Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to our coverage of the UN General Assembly. I'm Raj Kumar, the President and Editor-in-Chief of Devex. And the UN General Assembly keeps every year becoming a more prominent place for key policy discussions on all kinds of global development topics. One group is often left out of that debate, and we're here to talk about that group today, and that's smallholder farmers. And we have probably the ideal person to speak with on this topic, and that is the President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, or IFAD, Gilbert Huongbo. It is wonderful to see you, Gilbert. We get this chance to do this often in person all over the world. That's so many key events that you attend. It's wonderful to see you even virtually to have this conversation. And I wanted to just begin by asking you to kind of put on the table, what are you expecting out of the General Assembly this year, particularly when it comes to smallholder farmers? There's a big food system summit coming up. What are you looking out for? What should we all be aware of?
First of all, thank you for having me on your show again. Clearly, for the food system summit, my expectation is for all of us to be able to keep the political momentum that has been built up over the last 2 years or so, which is one. And secondly, it's important for us to keep the small-scale holders at the center of all the strategic decisions that we are making. We do know that 80% of the world poorest live in the rural area, and most of them are still in the agriculture and food production system, and with 1 or 2 hectares on average. So it's important for them that they are at the center. The third expectation, yeah.
Is there anything tangible that these smallholder farmers should be expecting to get out of the Food System Summit? Is there something in particular you're looking for, you're advocating for on their behalf?
So one of the things that I'm advocating for is for us to really put together a process that will lead progressively to ensuring that the small scale, we look at the decent living wages for the rural agriculture workers. So the minimum living wage and conditions for the small scale holders is key to me. Secondly, quite frankly, at the end of the day, it's going to be a matter of how do we ensure that we can bring the financing, particularly to finance the innovation and the technology that will help the small scale holders increasing their productivity and therefore their contribution to the whole value chain.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this is a food system summit. It's not an agriculture summit. It's not a nutrition summit. This idea of food systems is somewhat recent. This way of thinking of this as kind of a cross-cutting, singular system. How do you see that evolution of food systems? And my understanding is that is a big part of your soon-to-be-released rural development report.
I mean, what's the challenge we have? This is not just an issue of the production, or if you look at that, just the transformation or just the distribution. It's the whole chain, quite frankly, and also the value creation. And more than often, what we notice is that the small-scale producers, today we know they produce 30-35% of our food that we consume on 11% of the Arab land. However, they are much more, the precarious community, they are much more at risk and vulnerable to different weather conditions. So what we are saying is that it's quite critical that we look at the whole chain, not just on a silo approach, from the land management to the water management to the production to the access of agricultural inputs, then the transformation, the storage, to access to the different market and so forth. And that's why, and without forgetting, of course, the nutrition dimension. And what we also are seeing our small-scale holders, because of their vulnerability to the extreme weather condition, the climate adaptation side is also a huge dimension. So from the economic dimension, from the food security dimension, from the nutrition dimension, as well as the global protection of the environment. So all of that has to be in the same package. That's why we talk about the global food system approach. The last point I want to make that we know that the private sector has an important role to play in the transformation of the food system and in ensuring that we are much more responsible in contributing to the fight against obesity or overweight, or those challenges that we have. So you really have to look at the global package.
Maybe we could talk a bit more about the private sector here, because it is fascinating that we're in this moment of great innovation, a lot of it private sector driven in the food space. You have alternative proteins, there's urban farming, there's new forms of renewable energy powering greenhouses. There's so much innovation happening in the food space, and yet there are millions of farmers who are still using really antiquated hand tools to prepare their fields for planting. Do you think the private sector is going to sort of naturally get to the point where they see the opportunity of smallholder farmers and invest more in their technology and capabilities? Or what can you and groups like IFAD do to facilitate that transition of technology to the people who need it?
Yeah. First of all, I must say that, and I'm very hopeful on that, the private sector, they have already identified that, let's call it business opportunity that you are talking about. And more are ready to invest. Yet the challenge is that agriculture sector remain not necessarily the most attractive when it comes to foreign direct investment or alike. That's where institutions like our own IFAD will come to play. When we partner together with the private sector, then we know the ground, we know the small scale holders, we can provide that extra assurance that they need to be able to invest. Secondly, and I'm very glad you raised it, Raj, if you look at the whole technological innovation in technology in the digital world, that's what really we need today. We need to bring innovation, and not necessarily we are not looking for the latest drone for the small scale holders, but there's a lot of technology affordable and available that if we can allow the small scale holder to access that, it will be a huge progress in productivity that I mentioned before, and also in attracting the youngsters into the agriculture sector and provide either self-employment or not only job opportunity, but also fighting against the food dependency and hunger that we see in different parts of the world. Let's recall that if you take Africa, for example, is 70 billion of food imports a year. And 263 million Africans will go to bed tonight without necessarily a decent meal. So it's important for us to bring the innovation in agriculture, and I would expect the private sector to play a big role, but in partnership with the international community and also to the national authorities.
Yeah, that's such an important point that Africa as a continent is still importing so much food and can't feed its own people. And yet there are opportunities here if we can increase the productivity of smallholder farmers. The other element of that is when we think of private business, often we go right to the biggest companies in the world, especially the big tech companies. But what about the local small and medium businesses that aren't farming themselves, but are in these local communities that support or connected to the broader value chain around farming? How do you see the opportunity there, and what is IFAD doing about that?
In fact, that's where is our area of focus. In IFAD, with other development partners, 3 years ago, we created ABC capital investment, so we can invest directly to the youngsters, those SMEs that are in agriculture in all different levels of the value chain, which is one. Secondly, in our core activity, we also invest directly more and more in the private sector, in addition to the concessional loan that we provide to the government for the rural area. But the last point I want to mention like this, where it does matter, is really those small entrepreneurs or agripreneurs that are looking for below 500,000 investment, and sometimes even 100,000 investment, 200,000 investment. So by also working with some national banks, including particularly something that we are focusing on, these days is the public development bank at the national level could be able to relay those financing at the small amount level, but which are critical, not only to ramp up the investment in the local or with the local SMEs, but also to make sure that it can contribute to the reduction of food dependency and the food security issue.
And those connection points are so important because even for the big international investors, the multilateral development banks, private investors and banks, if we can connect, make it easy to connect those impact investors with the smallest scale potential recipients of loans or equity investments, then you might unlock this huge opportunity. And historically, the transaction costs are so high, and it's been a challenge. And that's why IFAD even exists, right, to help bridge that gap. One of the related issues coming out of the debate around the Food Systems Summit is this idea that there's a lot of concentration of power in food systems. Is that how you see it? Do you feel like we're too heavily concentrated, maybe with the bigger players, and not enough with smallholder or local entities in the food systems? How do you see this issue of concentration of power?
No, listen, the concentration of the power and the fact that the big players or the big commercial farmers or the big private sector companies, they do have power. For me, this is undeniable, is a fact. However, where I do not agree is to simply think that those powers are not cognizant of the issue, or they are not willing to contribute. The whole beginning of this whole food system came out of a need expressed also by some of those big players that we really, not only as part of the CSR, the corporate social responsibility, but even as business opportunities. So it's not them against us. And this is really what I'm pushing, and I'm putting IFAD in the middle and bridging that two worlds. I really think that we're going to miss the boat and we're going to miss the debate if we start looking at that is them against us. At the end of the day, in Fine, I see that as the two sides of the same coins onto that. It doesn't mean that we do not have challenges. We do have challenges, and that we expect a lot from those big players. But one thing, and this is what I started with, one thing that is my expectation is to invest more in all the climate adaptation, not only just on the mitigation, the climate adaptation for the rural and the rural area. Secondly, it's more important to look at that the practice of ag by the small scale holders is not just a matter of producing food for consumption. It's a matter of their dignity. It's a matter of giving them the voice in this debate we're having. Otherwise, we miss the boat. And this is why IFAD is trying to do what we have done, more than 40 dialogues in different organizations we have organized. We have supported 100 of other government-related dialogue to ensure that we bring out that voice in this process. The commercial farmers also, we expect them, not in addition to the technology point we just discussed, where they can contribute a lot, is to also, is very complex, and I recognize it's going to be very complex. But, just think about that coffee or cocoa producer in Colombia or in Ghana on that. We got to make sure that at the end of the day, they also have that minimum for a decent life for themselves and their family.
And that issue of that minimum, especially connected to your point about climate adaptability, that's a pretty critical and urgent one, right? Because many of these small scale farmers are right on the edge. And as the climate is changing radically fast, it doesn't take much before their farms become completely unproductive and they don't have sufficient water supplies or whatever the issue. So this is really an urgent one. And this Food Systems Summit, as a result, is so critical. I guess in just the moments we have left, Gilbert, maybe you can tell us what you want to come out of this Food Systems Summit. All eyes are trained on it at Devex. We're covering it very closely. We have a whole new newsletter around it, Devex Dish, focused on food systems. What are you looking for? What are you calling for to come out of the Food System Summit specifically?
Listen, clearly, the expectations are high on that, but we're not going to solve the problem overnight. Let's also be frank with ourselves. So to me, the very first thing is to make sure that we have a follow-up mechanism with a clear accountability system in that we will report back on the progress we are making. And the progress at different levels, which are the 5 or 7 coalition that we are talking about, from the nutrition and the hunger dimension to the school feeding, or to the blue food, or to this decent income for the small scale producers, to make sure that we have a game plan for each of them, and that every year through the HLPF, the high level political forum that's happening in New York or in the UN every July, we have a mechanism to report back to the stakeholders that we are making progress. And that progress has to be anchored at the national level, where we also work with, don't forget, we cannot make it ourselves. We need to bring in not only the small scale producers themselves, but we need to bring in also the groups that are very vulnerable. I'm thinking particularly to the women and the girls, which we know that 55% of the workforce in the rural area are women on that. So we need to make sure we bring that dimension. The youth, we need to make sure we bring them, that the indigenous people, we need to make sure that we bring them as we go forward. So I am very convinced that this is not just a summit by saying that we make a summit and the day after September 23rd, everything's back to normal. Both the Secretary General, the Deputy Secretary General, ourselves here in Rome-based agencies, and a lot of non-UN actors, including private sector and others, are very clear on that we really want to make sure that every single year we can measure the progress and implementing what is being agreed from those coalitions, the means of implementation, and finding ways to scale up the financing that is available, because we know the gap in the financing is also quite very high, including the one the last point you made, i.e. the adaptability side, which we know that the investment in the whole climate finance, only 1.7% goes to adaptation, where we really need to make sure that in the upcoming COP26, that is also hopefully being addressed. So my point is that let's don't say that, oh, it's just another UN conference, another UN summit. The issues are complex, but we have very clear coalitions that we want to move forward on them. And we are working on a mechanism to follow up and to report back and being accountable on those results.
Well, I know, Gilbert, you're one of the architects of that game plan. So it's been really insightful to get a chance to hear directly from you on what you're hoping for and working toward at the Food Systems Summit, at the UN General Assembly. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Gilbert Huongbo, the president of IFAD.
Thank you so much for having me.